Today, we're diving into the history of qualitative research. But listen, this isn't just a dry rundown of research methods. This is a story about intellectual warfare, a knockdown, drag-out fight for the very nature of reality itself, and a revolution in how we even begin to understand what it means to be human.
In this quote right here, it just nails it. We no longer just write culture, we perform culture. You see that? It signals this massive shift away from the idea that we could just observe life from a distance, like a scientist with a clipboard. It means recognizing that the very act of doing research changes the world you're trying to understand.
You know, at its heart, the mission of qualitative research started out as something really noble. It was built on this deep humanistic idea that to understand the social world, you can't stand outside of it. You have to get inside and see things from the perspective of the people actually living it. And this reveals the moral core of the whole project. The goal wasn't just about collecting data. It was to write, and I love this phrase, tiny moral tales. Stories that could actually act as guides, as pillars to help people endure and prevail. That's a commitment to social justice, baked in from the very beginning.
But, and this is a huge but, that foundation has a really dark and complicated side. To really get why a revolution was needed, we have to look at what it was fighting against. And that story starts with something called the colonial gaze.
So, in the early days, social scientists really wanted to be like natural scientists. They wanted that same level of prestige, of certainty. They tried to be these completely objective, detached observers who believed they could uncover a single, universal truth about other cultures, kind of like a geologist studying a mountain. And that led to this absolutely stunning assumption that looking closely at another human being was no more complicated, ethically or otherwise, than looking closely at a rock. I mean, think about that. It literally turned people into objects, specimens to be collected and analyzed, not partners you learn with.
And the damage was, well, devastating. For so many people, this so-called scientific approach was just another weapon of oppression. As the indigenous scholar Linda Tuawai-Smith says so powerfully, the word research itself became one of the dirtiest words in the indigenous world's vocabulary, tied forever to the horrors of colonialism.
Okay, so you can see how this problematic history created these deep, deep fault lines. The field didn't just evolve peacefully, it fractured. It was torn apart by these intense intellectual battles over the biggest questions. What's real, what's true, and how can we possibly know? These are known as the paradigm wars.
So, what even is a paradigm? Well, the easiest way to think about it is as a basic set of beliefs that guides everything a researcher does. It's like a team's rule book. It tells you what questions you're allowed to ask, what methods are okay to use, and what even counts as knowledge at the end of the day.
And these wars basically happened in three big waves. First, from the 70s to the 90s, it was a war against that old scientific model, with new ideas attacking the very notion of a single, objective truth. Then, once the old guard was weakened, the new paradigm started fighting a war among themselves for who would be top dog. And now, the war is over evidence itself, with these rich, interpretive stories clashing with a big push for standardized, measurable proof.
But this wasn't just some abstract fight happening in university halls. The biggest, most profound shift came when the very people who had been put under the microscope started talking back, demanding not just to be seen, but to have justice. This was the real turning point, both morally and politically.
Suddenly, you have this explosion of critical theories rising up from the margins to shake the whole foundation. Thinkers from feminist, critical race, indigenous, and queer theory all started asking the same revolutionary question, but in different ways. Hey, whose knowledge are we valuing here? And who is all this research really for?
For instance, critical race theory directly punches back against easy, comfortable narratives. Its theorists argue that, hey, despite stories of progress, race is still a massive factor in who gets what in life. It challenges that whole idea that society is somehow colorblind or post-racial.
Feminist researchers, on the other hand, make this huge pivot on ethics. They said, let's move past these abstract, universal rules and focus on relational ethics. What that means is the human relationship right there between the researcher and the participant, that becomes the #1 ethical issue.
It's not just about ticking off boxes on a form anymore.
And indigenous scholars came in calling for a total overhaul, a decolonizing sensibility. This means research has to actively work to undo its own toxic past. It means being constantly aware of that problematic gaze, and it means honoring indigenous knowledge and relationships as legitimate and powerful in their own right.
So, after all that conflict, all that revolution, where does that leave us? Well, the result is a field that is messy, it's complex, it's fragmented, it's full of arguments, and it is radically different from where it all started. Welcome to our messy but liberated present.
And this whole history leaves us with this one central, nagging question, right? If that old idea of a single, objective reality is off the table, and every viewpoint is shaped by who you are and where you stand, then what in the world is truth?
A really helpful way to think about this new reality is through a metaphor. The idea of the bricolage.
So a bricolage is basically like a quilt. It's something you piece together from whatever different materials you have on hand. In this view, knowledge isn't some single perfect photograph of reality. It's a collage. It's a quilt of different interconnected pieces. And that makes the researcher a bricoler, a kind of scholarly quilter, weaving together a complex story from many, many threads.
So just think about all the old ideas that had to be smashed to make way for this. The idea of a single, capital T, truth? Gone. The detached, all-knowing researcher who stands above it all? Gone. That clean line between the expert and the subject? Completely blurred. The belief that your methods could ever be perfectly neutral? No way. Even basic concepts like validity and data aren't stable anymore. All of it shattered.
But you know what? This whole chaotic, messy history is ultimately seen as a profound liberation. It's an escape from what the philosopher Hannah Arendt called the coerciveness of truth. It is, as our source so beautifully puts it, an emancipation from generations of silence, an emancipation from seeing the world in one color.
This new reality is exciting, for sure, but it is also incredibly challenging. Because in a world of many truths, where no single story gets to be the final word, we're all left with this huge responsibility. How do we choose which stories to believe, which stories to lift up, and which stories to tell? That's the battle for reality that every single one of us now faces.